Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for calling in. It looks like you have some questions about TN visa for me.
Yes, I do.
All right. Yeah, let me know what we can help you out with.
Yeah, I think sort of some of the things that I'm seeing online in regards to the letter that you need in terms of providing it at a port of entry. I've seen a lot of conflicting information, um, and my background is as a lawyer as well, so I get a lot of conflicting information from immigration lawyers um, as well. And it's just sort of, I don't know, especially in this immigration scene, if it's supposed to be, some of the letters of support are very specific and they even cite to sort of pieces of the code and really go into detail about how the job that you're doing is aligned with a TN visa and why you should be admitted. And then there's also letters where it's just a job offer, which talks about, remuneration, but it's one of the professions listed, and sort of the officer, when they're making their decision, can sort of draw those lines and say, this is in compliance because you have the qualifications necessary to be able to do this job. And then the job is on a contract sort of basis, and it falls within the guidelines of a
Yeah.
TN visa role. I'm not really sure which direction I'm supposed to go into, or based on what you guys have been seeing, if there's a recommendation based on sort of the ongoing immigration scene that one's better than the other.
So let's start with your qualifications. What is your education? Are you licensed? What do you have as far as
Yes. So
qualifications?
I have a LLB from the United Kingdom, and then I have my foreign credentials assessed, so they meet the requirements for the United States. And then I also have an LLM from the United States, and then I sit for the bar this July.
Perfect. Okay. And currently, what is your status?
I'm in an F1 status, so I'd be applying for a change in status in May at a port of entry.
Okay. So something to clarify, you don't do a change of status at a port of entry. Change of
Okay.
status is only done inside the United States. Okay, that's done with USCIS. If you're leaving the country and you're coming back in, you're applying for a new status. Okay,
New
so
status. Okay. Yep.
you would just be applying for a TN at that point at the port of entry. Now, I'm going to go
Correct.
back to your question that you asked about the letters. So I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of what you're seeing is style differences, which really
Okay.
doesn't matter as far as a TN application. Some lawyers, in my opinion, overdo it. They're very
Okay.
wordy with their
Mm-hmm.
TN letters and have a lot of information in there that is just not necessary. They'll go off
Okay.
on the potential employee's background, for example, for multiple paragraphs, which isn't necessary. Do you either have the degree or license or not? That's all they care about at the port of entry. Do you meet
Mm-hmm.
that minimum requirement from the USMCA? And that's really easy to show either through your license or your degree. And that's really
Okay.
all that needs to be discussed about that in a letter. And you'll see letters again go off for multiple paragraphs talking about how great this person is and their experience and whatever. That's irrelevant to these applications.
Okay.
They don't care. They just care whether you have that degree or license or not. Then you see a lot of that throughout these letters where they will almost make legal arguments to the border, and they can be multiple pages long. Well, in my
Mm-hmm.
experience, border officers don't care and they don't want to read letters that are very lengthy.
Mm-hmm.
They want a simple, straightforward letter that points to the criteria and lays out how you qualify. That's it. And as a simple equation as possible. 1 + 1 = 2. If you make them go through algebra, then they're going to get confused and then they're going to refuse your application because you're making it difficult for them to do their job. They want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
see it very plainly in front of them and be able to make that decision as quickly as possible. So what does the letter need to obtain or contain at a minimum? Well, let's first differentiate between the letters that people often use. One is incorrect and one is correct. One of them, and it's confusing because if you read the regs, it says you need an offer letter to apply for a
Mm-hmm.
TN, which is incorrect because offer letters do not contain the necessary information for a border officer to make a decision on a TN. An offer letter is an internal HR document that typically just lays out the offer of employment to the employee, and it's between HR and that employee, letting them know, hey, we're giving you a job offer as a lawyer. We're going to pay you X amount of dollars a year, and you're going to get these benefits. We'd love to
Mm-hmm.
have you on our team, right? It's a simple document like that that doesn't contain the necessary details for a border officer to determine whether or not that individual qualifies for a TN or whether or not the position itself qualifies for a TN. So those offer
Mm-hmm.
letters, the majority of the time, are not sufficient for TN application purposes, and we advise against using them most of the time. Now,
Okay.
what is typically used is what is called a support letter. That's what we refer to it as. And that is a specific document that's written for TN visa application purposes. And it contains
Mm-hmm.
all the necessary components for a board officer to quickly look down that letter, identify if the person qualifies, and issue the visa. Well, what does that letter need? Well, here are the components. Number one, it has to be from a job offer from a U.S. entity. Okay, that has to be supported by the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. employer on their U.S. letterhead with their contact information. So it has to
Mm-hmm.
be on that U.S. company letterhead with those details. Then it has to be addressed to the port of entry if you're flying at a port. So, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And
Mm-hmm.
the border wants to know that this employer wants to support you in that TN process. So they want to see a letter that explicitly notifies them of their need and desire to employ you as a Canadian under TN status in the United States. Okay. Um,
Okay.
they want a start date. So there has to be a definitive start date on the letter. And
Okay.
they need to know the duration of the visa. And this is where it can get a little bit confusing. And employers say, "Oh, we don't want to put an end date because this isn't a contract." Well, they're correct. It's not a contract. This is a we refer to it as a visa document, right? It's only for visa purposes that this is used. But it must have a a period of time for which they need you in the United States, and it has to be a temporary time period. That time
Mm-hmm.
period can be anywhere from 1 day up to 3 years maximum per stay.
Okay.
So you can renew it indefinitely, but per stay, they're only going to admit you up to a 3 year time period. So we typically
Mm-hmm.
recommend 3 years in those letters um, because no matter what, it's at will employment in the United States. So if you quit or leave before the 3 year term, well, the employment ends and the TN status becomes null and void at that point. Um,
Okay.
so 3 years maximum. And another thing to keep in mind, that start date on that letter will determine how soon you can apply at the port of entry as well. You have to apply within 10 days of that start date. So if you go to the port of entry too early, maybe 2 weeks or a month before your start date, they will turn you around and tell you to come back, when you are within that 10-day window. Okay.
Okay.
So you have to have that time frame with a start date and an end date, so they know how long they need this visa to be issued for. It has to indicate the TN occupation under which you're applying, and that can be confusing too because HR sometimes want to use an internal job title that is not listed on the USMCA occupations list. Although you can do that, it can be confusing to a border officer if they can't clearly identify that occupation under the list. So
Okay.
we typically advise to apply under the occupation. Again, you're not applying for a job, you're applying for a visa, and you want to make sure the
Mm-hmm.
border officer understands the category under which you're applying. So identifying the occupation and having the support letter drafted around that occupation. And that includes title. Okay. So in this case, lawyer. That's the occupation on the USMCA occupations list. Then
Mm-hmm.
beyond that, they need to know who you're working for. So typically, there's going to be a brief paragraph that talks about the company, right? The company bio. Who are they? What do they do? Uh, and refer them to the website or whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
Then you also need details about the position itself, and this is very important. I see people overdo this as well. Bullet point
Okay.
list of duties is often the best way to do this. And 8 to 10 bullet points, lay out what are your duties? What is it that you expect to do in the United States as a lawyer? And those duties should be clearly aligned and consistent with what a lawyer does, so that the border officer can look at those duties briefly and say, oh, yeah, this person's a lawyer. Those duties are
Mm-hmm.
consistent with what a lawyer does in the United States. Okay.
Okay.
Very important, and make it simple. Again, they don't want to read through this lengthy document and have to decipher what some duty says. It has to put it in plain terms that the border officer can understand and clearly identify those as the duties that a typical lawyer would perform in the United States. Then they also need to know you qualify. So there's typically a short statement in there that talks about the occupation. So TN occupation of a lawyer, what the minimum requirements are for that occupation, and then how you meet that. And again, that doesn't have to be lengthy, just a short reference to your qualifications, your education that would qualify you under the USMCA.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the basic components of the support letter. As long as you have the occupation, start and end date, the detailed duties, uh, oh, compensation. I didn't say that one. You need to have the
Right.
compensation. They need to know how much you're going
Right.
to get paid. And compensation has to be in terms of hourly, monthly, or yearly wage. Okay. Um, Sometimes people have different uh, payment structures, maybe commission or other types of structures that they don't like to see that. So no matter what it is, you need to break it down to a monthly, hourly, or annual wage so that they can
Okay.
you're going to get paid. And then clearly throughout the letter, make sure it's understood that this is a temporary employment, that you have no intentions of coming to the United States permanently. And those are the basic components of a support letter. So in the end, there's no real right or wrong way to write it. As long as it has
Mm-hmm.
those components in it, and then it's going to be satisfactory and sufficient for a border officer to be able to read through that to determine whether or not you qualify and deserve that TN status.
Okay. Perfect.
All right.
I think that clarifies a lot of the sort of questions that I have. And then now my last sort of question is, and I don't know if you've seen this before or if anything changes. So, and this is where I'm kind of confused about how much to go into detail and maybe how much not to. So the
Yeah.
typical job, the one that I hold right now, I work for sort of class action lawsuits as an expert to be able to sort of move the case forward. And how that works typically, and it's a very standard model that you probably are aware of, is that they hire people out through recruiter agencies, but you work for the law firm. But that's like a very typical model for these class action cases. You're not hired by the law firm, you're contracted out because it's a part of the payment model when these companies retain these firms to be able to move their class action forward. So I don't know if that really warrants going into detail in the letter, or if
Less is
how I
more.
can.
Yeah, less is
Less
more.
is more.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
if it's not an absolute component of the job offer that they need to know in order to determine your qualifications, then
Mm-hmm.
you probably don't need to include it. You're just going to confuse the border officer with information that they don't need to know. So
Okay.
what I would say is, as far as, and I think this question is who should that letterhead be from, right? Who is the employer in that situation? Well, the employer in the
Uh,
end is who is paying you.
right. Yes, exactly.
So whoever's on that pay statement, is who should be writing that support letter.
Okay, perfect.
And then as far as, your duties go, it can be confusing with what you're explaining for a board officer who might not understand your your your,
Hmm.
your specific situation. So
Hmm.
my suggestion would be, and if you're familiar with the Occupational Outlook Handbook, go in there and look at lawyer and
Okay.
what they define as a lawyer and the duties of a lawyer. Compare your duties to those lists of duties and make sure that you position it and you emphasize your duties that are consistent with that. Okay. So it's very clear based on your duties that they align with what a lawyer would do. Okay. And while
Okay.
keeping it again as simple as possible, you don't want to go off on a lot of terms and that a border officer may not understand, that may be foreign to them.
Right. Okay. That makes perfect sense.
Okay. The whole keep it simple, stupid, right? Simple as possible.
Yeah. 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 I think it's, as you said, I just going down the rabbit hole doing sort of my research, and some of the letters I'm just like, it's like 3 pages, and I
Too
just,
much.
having been through the process at the border before, I can just tell that a lawyer is going to, or an officer's just not going to want to read that, and then you're going to be grilled with questions. And I wanted to make it simple and outline it, and yeah, so
Yep.
that makes sense.
You are correct. And typically we like to keep our letters 2 pages or less.
2 pages or less. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
and you typically can do that for these letters. There's very few scenarios in which it would have to go longer, especially for a lawyer. You can get into more
Mhm.
complicated occupations, maybe a consultant or scientific technician, technologist that might warrant a little more explanation. But with a
Okay.
lawyer, yeah, again, keep it simple.
Okay. Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay. Any other
Yeah, I
questions
think
that you had for me?
no, I think that's it. You've answered them perfectly for me, so that clarifies a lot.
All right. Well, I appreciate you calling in. Thank you for your time, and we wish you the best of the luck with the process. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. Bye.